All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Beatrix Potter author event. We're so glad you have joined us tonight. My name is Anna. I'm here with the library, and I'd like to welcome you to our author event. The library wants to give a special thank you to Main Street Books here in St. Charles, who makes it possible for the library to host events like these. We have Emily here from Main Street Books. Hi, Emily.
Hey, Anna. Nice to see you this evening, this glorious Wednesday.
Yes. So we would like you to know that we have links to purchase these books that we're talking about tonight through Main Street Books. They'll be in the comments, or you can also find them on this event's entry on our calendar. They'll be there too. Any pro tips about buying the books, Emily?
All you got to do is just let us know where to send them and we will get them out to you. You can pick them up in store, and anyone who orders copies of Beatrix Potter Scientist will receive a fabulously adorable book plate. Look at these, signed by both the author Lindsay Metcalf and the illustrator Junyi Wu, which is very exciting. And we just got word that Linda Marshall is going to send us book plates for her book, Saving the Countryside, as well. So we're very excited to get those in a little while, and we will send out those as well to you. So book plates ahoy if you order books from Main Street Books. So thank you so much, Anna. Thank you to the library. Thank you to our authors. We're so excited to be with you this evening. So I will pop back off and enjoy the event.
Wonderful, thank you. So speaking of comments, where you can find the book links, at the end of tonight's event, we have some time set aside for audience questions to be answered. So if you have a question for Lindsay, Linda, or Junyi, put them in the comments and hopefully we'll have time to answer them all before the event is over. Without further ado, it's time to meet our guests. I'm here tonight with 2 authors and 1 illustrator. So first we have Lindsay Metcalf. She is a journalist and the author of 3 picture books for the young and curious. Hello, Lindsay.
Hello.
Second, we have Junyi Wu. She's the illustrator of 3 different books, including the 2020 Newbery Honor book that you might have heard of last year. Hi, Junyi.
Hello.
And she is the illustrator of Beatrix Potter Scientist. Lindsay is the author of that book. And then third, we have Lindsay Ellivitz Marshall. She's the author of Saving the Countryside, the story of Beatrix Potter and Peter Rabbit, as well as 2 other nonfiction books for children that are coming out this year and many other fiction picture books. Hi, Linda.
Hello, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much, Anna, for hosting this. Thank you, Main Street Books. What a pleasure. And thank you so much, Lindsay, whose brainchild this entire event was. Thank you, and a pleasure to meet you, Junyi.
Yes. We did want to say, too, that Saving the Countryside is illustrated by Ilaria Urbanati, who could not join us tonight, but who's done beautiful work in the book. So, Lindsay, Linda, and Junyi, will you each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your books about Beatrix Potter?
Sure, I can go first. I am the author of Beatrix Potter Scientist, beautifully illustrated by Junyi Wu, and published by Albert Whitman, and it just came out on September 1st. This is my debut picture book. It's a picture book biography set in the time when Beatrix was exploring her scientific interests. She really got started with scientific illustration as a young child and a teenager, and then discovered fungi and really went down this rabbit hole, for lack of a better word, to explore how fungi proliferate. And she started seeding them from spores and even ended up writing a paper for the Linnean Society of London, which was a big scientific society and still exists today. But because she was a woman, she was not allowed to attend the meeting where her paper was presented. And she was declined for publication. They said it needed more work. And that's when we see her shortly after start to pivot more into children's books. So that's kind of where this ends. And I think more where Linda's book picks up. Because Beatrix was a multifaceted person, and that's what really interested me in this story. Just that I had never known she was interested in science, and there were even more facets to her life, sheep farmer, conservationist. So I'm really excited to talk about her, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Should I go in, or maybe Junyi? It would be interesting to hear about the illustrations, and then I'll go. Okay.
Hey everyone, I'm Junyi, and I'm an illustrator working in animation and children's books. And Beatrix Potter Scientist is the third book that I've gotten to work on, and it was really fun to get to illustrate the life of one of my favorite childhood writers or authors, and draw like, pictures of the beautiful English and Scottish countryside. So thank you, Lindsay, for having me with you on this book, and yeah, I'm excited to be here today with everyone.
And thank you. And I'm Linda Marshall, and I had the privilege of going on a journey in Great Britain about 2 years ago. And prior to that, I wasn't particularly interested in Beatrix Potter nor in Peter Rabbit, although I love The Mischievous Little Rabbit, and I think it was really written about me. So, because I was a very mischievous child. But, and I don't think I've grown out of that yet. Anyway, I happened to go to England with a group of children's writers, and each writer picked out an author we were interested in studying. And I must tell you that Beatrix Potter was not mine. I didn't want to study Beatrix Potter. In fact, I studied Lewis Carroll, and I gave a presentation about Lewis Carroll. But then I went to Castle Cottage, which is where Beatrix Potter lived. And it was one of the farms that she bought after she made money from selling books about Peter Rabbit and all of those characters we know so well. And it was also after she had been declined as a scientist, simply because she was a woman. And because she was a woman, she was not allowed to go to university and study science and become a great scientist. So she turned to writing kids' books. She never gave up her interest in science. And this book talks about how she grew up and how she was not allowed to do things that her brother was allowed to do. But she found her own way. And when she started to write children's books, she had a very difficult time selling them, but finally, she found her own way. And when she did, and she sold them, she bought a house in the country, and she saved all that land from being developed into vacation houses. And she saved flocks of sheep, and she gave money to women who didn't have much money. They were poor farm wives, and their husbands would just not allow them to have the kind of money that they needed for taking care of their family. So Beatrix made sure they did. And Beatrix was one terrific woman. I was really impressed. Not only that, this book has been translated into French, Korean, and I think Italian. So she's really been making it around the world. I have a couple of other books. This also came out this year, the Polio Pioneer, in case anyone's heard of viruses. We happen to have one we're knowing intimately right now. This is about another virus, and it explains about viruses, and it's a very hopeful book because polio is something you probably never, ever heard of. Thank goodness for that. And maybe someday COVID-19 will be something that nobody will have ever heard of. So thank you very much.
Very nice. So we got to hear some about why Linda chose to write about Beatrix Potter. Lindsay, do you want to share the story of how you picked her and why you decided this was something you wanted to write a children's book about?
Yeah, I came from a journalism background, And so I was used to researching many things and, learning one thing one day and learning another thing another day. And so I read widely and I follow a lot of blogs and newspapers. And one day, a blog called Brain Pickings did a story about Beatrix Potter's mycology. And that, for any kids, that's the study of fungi. And it had all of these gorgeous pictures that she had drawn and painted of mushrooms and spores. And, it showed them up close and under the microscope, and it showed them in these beautiful renderings that just looked like you could lift it off the page. It was so realistic. I had never heard of this side of her, and I, like most people, was a fan of her books as a kid. Grew up reading about Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny and the whole crew. But to me, as a kid, she was this all caps name. That was it. I had no idea what she looked like. I didn't know anything but her voice. I mean, her voice was very clear in her stories, but I didn't have any idea that she was a scientist. I didn't have an idea that, like Linda wrote about, that she was a conservationist. She had all of these, stages in her life. And me, I am also an intersectional person. I grew up on a farm. I appreciate nature. I became a journalist, and then I decided to stay home with my kids and write children's books. And so I loved the idea that she took this passion and studied it just for her. I mean, because she had this curiosity. And when it didn't work out, it's not something we often talk about in children's books, especially, but it didn't work out for her the way she wanted it to. And then she found a way to use those talents that she developed in looking at things closely and observing to bring stories alive. And she was always imagining things as a child and as a teenager, as a young woman. She would be doing these scientific illustrations, but she also would be drawing pictures of rabbits wearing coats and selling them as Christmas cards. So it was all kind of intermeshed at the same time. And I really wanted to explore, how we don't have to be just one thing, and we don't have to be what people tell us we have to be either. As Linda mentioned, she wasn't allowed to go to school, not just university, but she wasn't allowed to go to school as a young child and a young woman. That was for her brother, Bertram. So yeah, I loved the complexity of her story, and it just would not let me go. And then when I found out that her journal was available to read, she had written this, it's called the Journal of Beatrix Potter now, 1881 to 1897, but she had written it in code from the time she was, 14 until her 20s. And then someone named Leslie Linder went through and broke the code, I think in the 50s or 60s, is that correct? And now it's all in English. And it's just like sitting down and having coffee with her, and all the mundane details about her life for 14 years. I would be on the treadmill reading this while walking for weeks. So it just wouldn't let me go. That's why I liked the story.
That's awesome. Thank you both for sharing those stories. So, question for all three of you. Can you tell us about how you went about researching this book, what that process was like, figuring out what you were going to write and what the facts were?
So I did some on the ground investigative reporting. I mean, there I was in England hearing about her in her house, and I just couldn't get enough because I was right there, and suddenly I was inspired and I couldn't stop. I wasn't supposed to be studying her. I really was supposed to be looking at somebody else. But I was so intrigued that I went to two museums. I looked through the archives there, and then I got in touch with a woman named Linda Lear, who had written a tome, a book like this thick about Beatrix Potter. And I contacted her and I said, this is what I'm writing. Will you take a look and make sure I've got everything right? And she was absolutely wonderful. And so she Some of the things that work in England don't quite work in the US. They're just slightly different. And so I did my leave no stone unturned. That's what I did.
I can go next. So I have not visited England. I've never been to England, and it's definitely on my bucket list. I would love to go to the Lake District because it's just gorgeous. So I did a lot of reading and found her primary source journal, as I mentioned, and because she's so famous, there was a wealth of other resources. All of her letters, all of the ones that have been found have been republished as books. So I was able to find her correspondence with Charles McIntosh, who was her mentor. He was a Scottish postman and really interested in fungi and botanicals. So there were these letters between the two of them, which she met him as a young girl. The book says that, you know, he would splash, or she would splash in his footsteps, and he didn't know she was there. So just, you know, trying to get a feel for her voice. But I live in rural Kansas, little town called Concordia. And so getting a hold of these resources was a little challenging at first until I realized I could get a library card at the nearest state university, which is about an hour and a half away. So I went and spent a day in the stacks and came home with these armloads of books. And then fortunately for me, unfortunately for the library had a major fire about, I think just a week or two later. So I was really lucky in order to get these books. But yeah, just did a lot of wide reading. And then her journal mentions all of the trips that her family took. They were wealthy Londoners, and they would holiday in the Lake District and in Scotland every summer. And so it mentions all the specific places that she went. So a lot of those are still in existence and are tourist attractions. And so, you know, just getting a feel for how they look and how they've changed from before. So yeah, some of the visual research went into it too. And I don't know if Junyi appreciated it, but I passed a lot of that on to her when I found out she had signed on.
Yeah, for sure. Lindsay's research definitely helped me a lot when it came to approaching the sketches, and it created this great jumping off point where it inspired to think of all sorts of fun details to include from her life, like what kind of mushrooms she'd be studying at any given time, or what kind of drawings she'd be making in her sketchbook while she was out and about. And so yeah, while doing the sketches, I just tried to include little things like that, and different plants that would be in the Scottish countryside that she was exploring, and different tools and instruments she'd be working with, what her study looked like with all her drawings spread out. So yeah, that was fun.
Okay, nice. So this next question.
Anna,
go ahead, Linda.
Anna, if it's possible, I sent some photographs, and I don't know if they came through, and if they did, this might be a good opportunity to show them.
I got one of a Great Britain travel guide.
Oh, okay. I sent 2 other batches, but I don't think I did it correctly. So it was a good idea. Let's just leave it at that.
The technology.
Right. But I shared them with Ilaria Urbanati, who is the illustrator of Saving the Countryside. So she too had some idea of how things looked when I saw them.
Very good. Yeah, I'm sure that's especially helpful as an illustrator to have pictures on hand.
I forgot to mention, I also had the book vetted by 2 people. I reached out to the Beatrix Potter Society. There's a whole society that dedicates themselves to scholarship on Beatrix Potter. So I knew that there were probably things that, you know, would need to be tweaked because I'm not as knowledgeable about Beatrix. And then a woman named Libby Joy graciously agreed to read it, and she gave me some helpful suggestions. And then because it was about fungi, there's a whole other profession of people who are experts on mycology. So I found someone who had written about Beatrix Potter's interest in fungi, and he's a professor at, I think, Miami University in Ohio. And he was very quick to review the manuscript and give me suggestions as well. But it was really cool when they both were encouraging and saying, yeah, I'd love to see this in the hands of children, because it's just such a cool, surprising story about her.
Yes, I learned a lot reading both of these. It was cool to get all these things that I never thought of or never would have known she was interested in that you guys included. So very nice. So next question is mostly for Junyi as an illustrator. Can you tell us a little bit more about your process, and then tell us too, is it harder to illustrate a book like this that's about real people and real places than it is to do a book that's just about fictional characters?
Yeah, for me, like the process started out with the cover and doing various sketches for the cover, kind of trying to create something that's engaging, but also tells the story of Beatrix Potter and the side that you might not have known, like her interest in science. And from there, we kind of explored various sketches to depict her at various stages of her life. And yeah, I guess it is easier in a way to draw from draw the life of a real person because there's reference photos. But so that part is easier. There are lots of photos of Beatrix throughout her life, so there are some challenges, like making sure details of the world are accurate and because it's set in a certain place and time, like making it believable and true to life.
Very nice. Does now feel like a good time to show the video that you shared with us?
Oh, yeah, sure. Let's take a look.
Okay, so we have a process video. All right, I'm gonna hit play.
Yeah, this is me drawing a bunny, like some of the ones that are hidden throughout the book. The book was drawn in colored pencils, so just kind of layering textures and little details.
And it's so cute. we all got very excited when we saw this video. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
All right, so next question for all of you. Is there a fun fact about Beatrix Potter that you learned while working on your books that you want to share with us? Like something new and maybe that we wouldn't even know or guess if we read the books. But if it's something you learn in the books, that's fine too.
For me, I think it was that her journal was written in code. To me, that's like a huge character detail, and I didn't really go into it in the book. I think I mentioned it in the back matter. But that was just so cool. She was not famous when she was writing it, but she clearly wanted privacy. She had these parents that she felt were overbearing, and were they? Who knows? Because she was a teenager when she was writing it. But I thought that was really cool. I loved getting to know her as a teenager. She learned to drive, but she didn't drive a car. She drove a pony cart, and she would like go on these rides throughout the country and just felt free. So I could really envision her as like a 16 or a 17-year-old young woman, just, escaping for a little bit with the wind in her hair. And she's got these buttoned up dresses, but yet she still is able to feel free. And another cool thing that is personal, she wrote The Tale of Peter Rabbit and some of the other early stories as picture letters, which is basically just a letter that she illustrated. And she wrote them to a couple of children, and one of them was named Noel. And that happens to be my dad's name. So that was kind of a cool coincidence. And Junyi put a picture of the picture letter in the book. And my brother actually said, is that like some sort of inside joke? Like, no, that's actually the real name of the kid. So anyway, there were so many surprises along the way, but those were just a few.
It's fascinating what we all find interesting. So because I heard Mandy Marshall give a talk, what I learned right away was that Beatrix felt kind of squelched as a kid because she had to keep everything on schedule. You know, even if she was involved in something, she had to leave it and just do whatever the time demanded, except in the summer when she went to Scotland and she was with her grandparents, and there she could be just as free as she wanted to run in the fields and check out the mushrooms and whatever she wanted. So that I thought was really cool. Now, the other thing is she loved animals. She had a bunny that was a good friend of hers. She had a number of other animals too. She would take mice out of traps and she would make them her friends. Well, you know, mice don't live forever. Nothing lives forever. And once in a while, even those animals that she would smuggle up the back stairs and bring into her room, they didn't live forever. But she wanted to draw them, and she wanted to draw them accurately. She would take their dead bodies and boil them. And after they were boiled and all the skin would come off, then she'd have the bones, and she would put together all of the bones and recreate the skeleton. And so by doing that, she was able to understand the anatomy of each animal. And so it really helped her drawing skills. So I think that's pretty cool. I'm not advising anyone to do that, but yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that to me was one of the reasons I wanted to write this book. And we have a scene where we do mention it. I can't remember if you mentioned it in yours too. So I wrote, but when the animals die, after she cries, she removes their flesh to admire their bones. There's care in every measurement from head to fingers to tail. Beatrix draws them again and again, outside and in. That's science. And my critique partners, I think maybe Julie is watching, they were kind of like, do you really want to mention that in a children's book? And I'm like, yes, I do. That would be for me as a kid. Because I just think it's so cool that, you know, she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty.
I couldn't think of how to tell it so delicately. So, and I didn't want to say she just boiled her pets. I mean, that was like, so I left it out. But now you guys know.
Yes, that is really interesting, and seems like a real dedication to science to be like, okay, now we're ready to boil an animal.
Yeah, she had a cabinet full of mouse skeletons, right? And I think at one point it got bumped or something and the skeletons fell apart and she had to put them back together.
I think we have to understand that it was a different age. And during that time, people did keep lots and lots of specimens. And so there were, I mean, lots of people would have things that we wouldn't want to do anymore because we understand the importance of the ecosystem. But people would capture butterflies and keep butterfly collections, and they would taxidermy all sorts of things. And while we can learn from those animals today, it's not a practice that we continue because it's often not good for the species, for the world.
Yeah, good point. So here's a question for each of you that's kind of fun. If you weren't an author and an illustrator, what would you be doing now? Like, what other professions would you do? And do you think maybe you'd be doing one of Beatrix Potter's passions, like science or conservation?
Junyi, you want to go first?
Okay. I think that's a good question. Uh, this year I feel like I'm struggling a little bit just to try and draw, so I don't even know. Um, but I guess if I weren't an illustrator, I'm pretty interested in special effects, like special effects makeup and like movie props and all that. Like I've been watching a lot of videos on that. But as far as conservation work and what Beatrix did, like I really admire everything that she did. And through this book, I learned so much about the extent of research that she did. And so, yeah, I feel like I definitely would want to use my art in the ways that she did to further people's understanding of the world around them and like breaking down information into like a visual, so to illustrate things that way.
Cool. For me, I would possibly be going back into journalism more. So I worked at the Kansas City Star newspaper as a reporter and an editor for 7, 8 years, I think. And then I left to stay home with my kids. Didn't really know if I was going to go back or not. Then discovered children's books and found a different style of writing and really enjoyed it. And I do still freelance some, but I also grew up on a farm here in Kansas, and I have to admit, I wasn't really interested in agriculture as a kid, but now I've come to appreciate it a lot more. We moved back to my hometown. My family's all here, and just being close to the land really soothes my soul. So I think if I weren't writing in some way, I would probably maybe not be a conservationist per se, and maybe not exactly a scientist, but I would probably be doing something with sustainable agriculture, because I find that really interesting and I like to write about it. I have another children's book on the horizon that's about vertical farms and traditional farms for very young kids. It's a rhyming picture book. So that's probably what I would do.
So for me, this is a like kind of late in life career. I raised my kids on a farm, and I just turn off the light so you can see, maybe if I can turn it right. There's the sign, my farm sign. It says Sheep River Farm. And we raised sheep, and now we don't have any sheep anymore. We just have an old farmhouse and no animals other than mice, which we're not boiling. And that was a joke, so it's okay to laugh. I don't know what I would be doing. I would probably feel a compunction to clean this dirty old house, because the house is like 200 years old and it needs a thorough scrubbing, and I find it kind of boring. So I'm having much more fun learning new things and writing and taking courses and baking and spending time with my family. And I don't want to clean my house. So there you go.
No. That's interesting to know that you had sheep, because sheep show up in your book about the special kind of sheep that she kind of preserved, right?
Absolutely. She almost single-handedly saved the Herdwick breed of sheep. They were near extinction, and the farmers didn't have much money to pay for vet bills. And so she came in and she paid some of their vet bills.
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool. So here's another fun question for you all that I think I almost had to ask. What is your favorite book by Beatrix Potter that you like to read?
Anyone? Okay, I will go. I was trying to think about this because as a kid, I was really only introduced to the basics. So I have a special place for The Tale of Peter Rabbit in my heart, but I also really enjoy reading The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. I don't know if this one's familiar, but it's maybe more because now I'm a children's book writer and I can appreciate the voice and the page turns. So like this spread, it's about this squirrel, and it goes across the pond, and she has a lot of description, and they run into this old owl who, you know, owls attack squirrels, but the squirrels don't really realize that. So this one page, when they came back very cautiously, peeping round the tree, there was Old Brown, who was the owl, sitting on his doorstep, quite still, with his eyes closed, as if nothing had happened. But Nutkin was in his waistcoat pocket. And then you turn the page. This looks like the end of the story, but it isn't. And then you turn the page again, and then it goes on and on. So I don't know, it just uses all of these crazy big words that most people would think you wouldn't put in a children's book, but I love it.
I'm going to defer to Peter Rabbit, just because he was just so mischievous and I really could relate to him.
Yeah, I like Peter Rabbit too. I still remember a lot of the illustrations from that story, like him in Smart Blue Jacket and like Mr. McGregor in his garden working. A lot of those illustrations really stuck with me when I was a kid. But other than that, probably the Tale of Tom Kitten, where I just think he's like really cute with his big eyes and like dressed up in the little blue outfit that's too small for him. Yeah.
I love imagining Beatrix as a real person with her rabbit on a leash, because there's these pictures of her where she takes the rabbit out in the garden and she's got it on a leash. And then in her journal, she talks about feeding it peppermints, I think, something really sweet. And there was this one visitor who would come and always give her pet rabbit peppermint, and then its teeth ended up rotting out, and it had all these problems because it was getting candy all the time.
I have a rabbit, but I was like, I've never tried giving it peppermints, but I don't think I will.
Didn't work out so well.
Yeah. No.
What's your
I wonder if they.
What's your rabbit's name, Junyi?
Oh, Franklin.
Nice.
We've had him for about 7 years. He's a Holland Lop, so he's got the floppy ears.
Oh.
Well, that's perfect. You had some in-house inspiration almost. That's awesome. So I have one last question for you all, and then we'll go to the ones we've gotten from our audience. So this last one is just, you might not be able to answer it, but if you can tell us about what you're working on next or what projects you have coming up, can you give us a little preview about that? Sometimes I know they're secret and you can't reveal any details, but.
Go ahead.
Linda, Linda, I know you gave us a preview of your book that just came out. Do you have any others? Or do you want to show us that one again?
I'll show a few other books. My book, Anne Frank, just came out, and I put it somewhere and now I can't find it. So this came out a few years ago with Scholastic. Kindergarten is Cool. This is not, I'm not working on these anymore. I'm just, Rainbow Weaver. I'm trained as an anthropologist, and this is a story that takes place in Guatemala, and it's based on some work that a friend of mine has done with Mayan weavers there, and how they have used their weaving to sell products and get money to buy books and pay tuition. And it's bilingual, English and Spanish. This is a story about the wind, and it's based on a Yiddish tale. And it's a story about what happens to the wind when, after winter is over and wind is really, really tired and needs a place to sleep, but nobody wants to take care of wind. So I'm working on 3 that are coming out in 2022 and 2023. They have not been officially announced, so I can't give you any hints. Sorry.
I have 3 books coming out this year. So Beatrix Potter was the first. No Voice Too Small just came out yesterday. The subtitle is 14 Young Americans Making History, and this is a poetry anthology that was edited by me and 2 other people, Keela Dawson and Jeanette Bradley. Jeanette did the illustrations. And it's about contemporary young activists with beautiful poems by best-selling and award-winning people that I couldn't believe said yes to participating in this project, because it's a book of my heart. Lots of diverse causes, diverse backgrounds, and really speaks to the moment that we're in, where youth are speaking up and making change. And this book is called Farmers Unite, Planting a Protest for Fair Prices, and it comes out in November, the week after the election. It is about the 1979 American agriculture movement protests, where thousands of farmers drove their tractors across the country and camped on the National Mall. I don't know if you can see it, but they wanted to protest low prices. And it was, I mean, if you think about 79, that's right at the beginning of the farm crisis. People were losing their farms and they felt desperate enough that they had to speak up. So that was a cool story for me, because growing up on the farm here during the farm crisis in the 80s, I had not heard this story. And it was one of those where I became so curious, I just had to know more, and spent many months going through archives and old newspapers, finding the voice of the farmers. And I'm really happy to bring this story out for the first time for children. And then I have 2 other books that haven't been announced that are coming in 2022 and 23, I think.
Very nice. Junyi, do you have any projects that you can talk about or no?
For me, I'm wrapping up on my first author illustrator book, Corky Can. So I'm pretty excited. Just like a simple little board book all about the cuteness of corgis and what little corgi can do. And so it just follows his adventures.
Awesome. Thank you all for telling us about what you've got going and what you've been working on. So now we're going to go to audience questions. So if you just joined us and you have thought of a question for any one of our guests or all 3 of them, go ahead and put them in the comments and we'll try and get to as many as we can. But we already have 2 that have come in. So first of all, if you could ask Beatrix any question, what would it be? What would you 3 say or ask her?
I know what I would ask her. And this comes from hearing Mandy Marshall's talk at Castle Cottage. And Mandy said that Beatrix's family felt different. They really were striving to fit into upper class London society. They were, and most of the upper class London society was composed of people who their religion was Anglican and they were Methodist. And hopefully I have all of this right. But Mandy said that they didn't feel that they fit in. And I would like to say to Beatrix, can you tell me, how did you feel different? Let's talk about that. Do you think that we all feel different in some way or another? I think that's what I'd like to talk about.
I think that's a good question. And I would probably ask her, do you have any regrets? Not that I think she should, but she spent so long focusing on fungi. It was a 10-year period of her life where she just really delved into this. And she also was interested in other types of science. She would collect fossils. And as we talked about, she would draw anatomy. And she also collected artifacts that she would find. But I always wondered if she wished she had more opportunity in that field. Obviously, she was a huge success and became world famous and beloved for generations, and there's nothing to regret. But I just wonder if that's the path she would have originally chosen.
I like that question. For me, I'd probably ask her something like what her favorite subjects or thing to draw is, or what kind of story she would illustrate if she didn't do Peter Rabbit, because it seems like she's, from her anatomical drawings to her drawings of fungi to these beautifully illustrated animals, like she can draw just about anything. So I'd be really curious what she'd do next.
That's great.
Nice, good question out there, and thank you, everybody. So the next question that our audience had is, how did you get started as an author or as an illustrator? What did that look like?
For me, I started writing in college, and I went into journalism, but I didn't really find picture books until I had kids. So my first child was born in 2009, and we read all the time. And, my memories of picture books as a kid were things like the Berenstain Bears and Beatrix Potter and Little Critter and the Little Miss and Little Mister books. But I didn't really know what had happened since then. And I started reading these amazingly funny books and surprising, and just, I couldn't believe the wealth of what was out there and what I had been missing. And I wanted to find a way to contribute to that. So I started writing and thinking that it was more like journalism. I wrote a first draft and sent it off to a critique partner, and I was a little offended when they said it wasn't ready. But no, it's a whole different style of writing, and took a lot of practice and a lot of learning about the craft in order to get a manuscript that was polished enough to send off. So that's my path.
So right after college, where I studied anthropology, I got involved in setting up some daycare centers. It was part of the women's movement. And I found myself reading wonderful picture books to 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and just loving it. And I read and I read and I read. And then later, I moved to Minnesota and worked there and did a lot of reading in a preschool there, and eventually started my own early childhood education center and did parenting education too. All of this involved reading a lot of picture books. And of course, I read to my own children too. So I kind of have a lot of picture books memorized. They're part of my soul. And I just love them. I love the cadence. I love the page turn. But it never occurred to me that I could write one, because I could see that they're hard. It just never occurred to me. And then I had a period of my life when I needed to write. I just had this intense urge to write. I grabbed a journal and I wrote a little bit of every day. And then I got the idea, well, maybe some of these stories could turn into something. And one of them did, and I got paid money for it. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is really interesting. I can take something I really like to do and get paid for it. So that was really fun. And I found that I was writing, wrote for like college testing programs, and I could like research all sorts of things and then write about them. And I tried all sorts of things, and then somebody said, what about a picture book? And I said, oh no, I can't do that. That's really hard. And then I wrote this story and I sent it in. And I have to tell you that when I wrote it, there was a grandmother in there and she was like, not so nice. And I shared the story with some of my critique buddies, my writing friends, and they said, she's not very nice, you know, this grandmother's not very nice. You can't do that. Nobody's going to want to read about a grandmother who's not very nice. I thought, oh. And so I made her a lot nicer. And I sold the story. And here's an interesting thing, that as I've been writing for kids, it's made me be a lot nicer too, because I'm appreciating how important kindness is. And it really, just like all those picture books that I was reading to little kids right when I got out of college, I'm now realizing more and more with every book I write, how much I want to bring kindness into the world. Thank you.
I think a lot of, for me, like the art in picture books really stuck with me as a kid, seeing all the covers and beautiful books in the library. Like a lot of those are still with me. And I just liked looking at all the artwork in these books, novels. And so I'm still kind of new to the whole children's book illustrating thing, but I guess I just feel really lucky to be able to do that now, to draw those pictures.
Nice. Thank you all for sharing those journeys. So another question that we've kind of touched on, but maybe we can elaborate on or repeat again. Have any of you visited Beatrix Potter's house and garden in England or been to that area?
So yes, I was there, and if I could figure out how to screen share, I could show everybody some pictures. Maybe when somebody else is speaking, I'll try to figure it out, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I may not be able to do that.
Yeah, I haven't been able to visit. It wasn't in the budget at the time I was writing the story, and definitely it's on my list, and I know so much more about it. I think it'll be even more gratifying to go see everything when I finally do get to go. Hopefully COVID will be over at some point. We'll be able to travel again.
Yeah, I've only seen the pictures of like her desk and outside of her, in her garden and outside her house, and it all looks so lovely. So I'd love to be able to visit someday.
Yes, that sounds like a dream trip to go and spend time there, for sure. So, well, Linda, looks, I don't know if you're having any luck. We have one more question from the audience we could start with Lindsay and Junyi. How many picture books are there about Beatrix Potter, and do you have a favorite? Are there more besides your two?
Yeah, there are a lot. And so that was one of the things, like, can I really add anything to this canon? But I found that a lot of the picture books out there didn't go into this side of her journey. So I thought people would find it interesting. One, I can't remember the title. There's like Beatrix Potter and her paint box, I think. That's a pretty good one. There's another one called Beatrix Potter. And what's the one, Linda, do you remember the one that's about her pets? I'm gonna have to look it up. That one was
I don't
pretty
remember.
well. There are a lot of picture books about Beatrix Potter, so I think that's one of the hurdles for writing something about someone who's already famous is people think they don't need another book about this person. But there's always more to learn about a famous person. I mean, you see with Abraham Lincoln, there's always new things coming out about him because it's part of our history. And when you can learn something new, it kind of reframes everything you know about not just that person, but the past. And so that's why I really liked learning about Beatrix more as a three-dimensional human, because she wasn't just an artist. She wasn't just a writer. She wasn't just a woman in Victorian England. She was all of these different things. And she had all these different ideas about what she wanted to do with her life and had all these roadblocks because she didn't have a way to make her own money. Her family was wealthy, but she couldn't afford her own home, or she didn't want to take her family's money until she started, she didn't want to buy anything unless she could do it herself. So I just loved her spirit and wanted other people to be able to feel that too.
So I just delved right into the project. It didn't occur to me because I was so compulsive about writing this. After I did all the research and was in her house and a couple of museums, then my group of writers that I was traveling with, then get this, we holed up in a castle in Scotland for a week. So I was going to use that as writing time to work on a middle grade novel that I've been working on for a long time, and I still haven't finished, but I was so intrigued with Beatrix Potter that I forgot all about the novel I was working on, and I just went head over heels in writing about Beatrix Potter. And by the time I finished that week, I actually had a rough draft. So of course, it took a lot longer and lots more research, but I had an idea of how I was going to tell her story. And so I didn't look until much later in the library and through, nor did I Google immediately to find out what other books were available on her. I was compelled. I had to do it. I did it.
I was the opposite. The first thing I did was Google, and I didn't see anything that delved into her science side, but I wanted to ask my agent, my literary agent, what she thought. Because so often I'll have an idea and maybe it's not as marketable as I would hope it to be. And, I've got books that haven't sold yet. So before I did any more extensive research and I was considering whether I had the budget to go to England at the time, I just shot off a quick email like, do you know this about Beatrix Potter? Do you think you could sell a book about it? She said, yeah, I absolutely think I could sell a book about that. So that's when I really started going.
Yeah, thank goodness. I'm glad. Glad it worked out for both of you and we have them. Well, thank you to our audience for submitting questions. Thank you to everyone involved for your patience with our technical difficulty there and having to switch to YouTube at the last minute. If you missed the first few minutes or just jumped in later, this will be available for about 30 days. I think we'll keep it up. So if you didn't get a chance to watch all of it, you've got some time to revisit and catch the beginning of our conversation. But thank you to Main Street Books for making this possible, to Linda and Lindsay and Junyi for coming and speaking to us about your work. We're very glad to have you with the library. And we do want to just say that we have an author event lined up for next month with Flavia, it's for Gustavo the Shy Ghost. We have the author of that book, coming on Facebook Live or YouTube to talk about her book. And it's really cute and good for October, and we're excited about that. So if you enjoyed this, you should come back for that author event too. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us. This was fun.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure it's been. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, friends. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.